Chapter 10. I didn't know I had drifted off to sleep until my alarm woke me. That meant it was 7:30. Apparently I had been able to sleep after all. Laying there in the dimness, I recalled the night before in my mind. I wanted to think it had only been a dream, but I knew I couldn't do that. I could almost feel the moist pressure of the doctor's hand on mine as he begged me to sing for him, could almost hear the strange note of distance and confusion in his voice. No longer would I be able to convince myself that things would get themselves back to normal. I would have to do something. What, I wasn't sure yet. First, I needed to figure out what was wrong with the doctor. As I jumped up and dressed, I tried to figure out just what to say to him. Should I just ask him right out what had happened last night? Or see if he brought it up first? I didn't like to just walk up and say, "Hey, Dad, what was wrong with you last night?" What if it had only been a bad dream? On the whole, I thought it would be better to ask him in a less direct way, perhaps just see if he was still acting strangely or if he referred to it himself. Strapping on my wristcom, I hurried out the door and rode the elevator up to B deck. As I trotted to sickbay, I took a couple of deep breaths to calm myself down. Then, straightening my jacket, I peeked in. He was there, giving a crewman his regular checkup. Evidently, he hadn't seen me come in, and I stood there observing him for a moment. It seemed to me that his hair was a little bit grayer than a few days ago, and his always thin form seemed even thinner. The lines on his forehead had multiplied, and his frown was more frequent than ever. As I stood watching, the patient got up, thanked him, and walked towards the door. I stepped aside, and the man passed me with a nod. The doctor began changing the sheets. Stepping into the room with purpose, I forced myself to call brightly, "Good morning, Dad." He looked up quickly, then said, "Good morning." Hesitantly, I stepped a little closer. "Are you feeling better this morning?" "Better?" He looked confused, standing there with one corner of the clean sheet in his hands, staring. "You know, you were tired yesterday." "Oh, yes." He went back to putting the new sheets on. "I think Trent was right. I just need a break. I might ask him to go ahead and hire a nurse." "No," I said. He looked at me, frowning. I blushed and looked down. "I mean, we don't need a nurse. We can take care of things by ourselves, just you and me." Sneaking a look at his face, I found his eyes fixed steadily on me. "Let me help you with that," I mumbled, and moved forward to tuck the corners of the sheet under the cot mattress. He stepped back and let me work. "Did you sleep well last night?" I asked. It was a moment before he answered, just long enough for anxiety to begin to rise in my chest. "Like a log," he said at last. I shivered. I should ask him about it, now. But did he not remember, or did he just not want to talk about it? Other than a slightly absent manner, he appeared to be acting normal. My mouth felt dry, and I tried to decide what to say next. Never had I felt so awkward around him. "What were you asking about yesterday?" I knew what he meant, but still I asked, "What do you mean?" "In Trent's quarters. You asked me something. What was it?" He sounded lost again, confused, searching. "Langham's disease," I said, trying to sound cheerful and careless, but with a vague feeling that I was failing. "Yes, that was it." He didn't say anything else, didn't ask why I'd wanted to know, nothing. He said nothing at all. "Should we go to breakfast?" I asked, struggling to speak lightly. "I need to wash my hands," he said, standing up. "You go ahead without me." Part of me protested against leaving him, but I agreed and left the room, heart sinking quickly. Something was wrong. I sat by myself at a little round table in the mess hall, idly picking at my food. It occurred to me as I moved the eggs back and forth with my fork that I had not told the doctor about the Langham's disease test I'd asked Commander Howitz to help me with. I hadn't intended to keep it a secret from him. I'd meant it when I told the commander that I wouldn't. Yet somehow I couldn't bring myself to say anything about it. Why, I did not know exactly. It just seemed that if I said anything about it, well, he'd know that I doubted him. And then if he had done nothing wrong, it would hurt him. If he had, well, that's what Commander Howitz was afraid of. Maybe he was right. What harm could it do to not tell the doctor, or at least not yet? My conscience pricked me hard. Was that fair to him? When had he ever done anything to deserve this distrust? He was my father, after all. He's not your real father. I felt like slapping myself. Yes, he was. It didn't matter if he wasn't my biological father. He was the one who had trained me, provided for me, cared for me my whole life. But it was all so hard to explain. Miss Lloyd? Startled, I looked up and saw young August Howitz standing in front of my table, a piece of paper in his hands. Yes? He held the paper out to me. My father asked me to give you this. He had to do some work on one of the airlocks, but wanted to get it to you as soon as possible. To my frustration, I found myself reddening with guilt as I took the paper. I should show this to the doctor. It was probably the results from the blood test. Thank you. I took the paper and folded it, then slipped it into my jacket pocket. Nervously, I pushed a slip of hair behind my ear and turned back to my food. Are you feeling better? He asked. I nodded. Yes, thank you. I felt my skin turning even hotter as I realized how my behavior must look to the young man. I looked up and tried to smile. Forgive me if I'm being rude. I'm just tired. Nodding, he said, I understand. I heard that your father has not been feeling well. It must be quite a strain on you. I can handle it, I assured. He'll be fine. I'm sure he will. I nodded and went on pretending to eat. Can I do anything for you, Miss Lloyd? The tone was kind and respectful, and it put me more at ease and softened my heart. I smiled more gratefully this time. No, but thank you for your concern. He smiled back, then turned and left. There were few people left in the room, I observed. Perhaps a half-dozen officers, one of whom was the captain. He sat near the doorway, finishing the last few bites of his breakfast. My stomach rumbled, and I looked down at my food and wrinkled my nose. I didn't want to eat, but I needed to. Laying my fork down, I picked up a piece of bacon and prepared to bite it. Jerry! The captain's voice was tinged with concern, and I jerked my head in his direction. In the doorway, the doctor stood. I couldn't see him well that far away with the light behind him, but he seemed to stagger slightly as he walked, and his shoulders drooped. Dropping the bacon, I jumped up and raced towards him. The captain was at his side in a moment. Jerry, you look awful. You're sweating. From this distance, I could see moisture dotting his face, but he shook his head. No, I was just washing my face. I'm all right, Trent. He tried to push the captain away and start towards a chair, but the captain held firmly to his arm. Jerry, you're not well. You need rest. The doctor grunted. I'm the doctor, not you. As your commanding officer, I order you... He stopped when he saw me hurrying up. Andi, you can convince him. I stared. The captain was right. He did look awful. He was pale except for the 2 dark half circles under his eyes, and his eyes had a glazed-over look. His face was moist, as were his hands, and when he looked at me, he looked as though he was trying to find his way. Where's Crash? He asked. He was here just now, wasn't he? I froze, staring into his eyes. He still looked lost, and I spoke slowly. Crash left, Doctor. He left yesterday morning. Left? But he was just here. What was wrong with him? He was acting the same way he had the night before, only worse. It was disturbing, and a wave of panic swept over me. Was he going crazy? Was he developing some kind of psychosis? I couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to my beloved doctor, couldn't even stand to let the thought cross my mind. I touched his hand. Dad, what's wrong? His eyes suddenly cleared and some color washed into his face. Wrong? I'm only tired, Andi. Trent, what are you holding on to me for? The captain and I exchanged a worried look, and he opened his mouth to speak, but a voice from his wristcom intercepted him. Airlock prepared for mooring, sir. I recognized the voice of Commander Howitz. The captain let go of his friend to answer the call. I'll be right there, Mr. Howitz. He switched frequencies and said, Mr. Yannendale, give permission to moor. Aye, sir. Turning the comm off, the captain spoke clearly and firmly. Jerry, if you won't listen to reason, I'm going to have to confine you to quarters. Don't be ridiculous, Trent. I'm only tired. Dad, I begged. He looked at me, and I saw confusion still hiding behind his eyes, but he didn't complain anymore. The captain laid a hand on his arm. Come on, Jerry. I waited, my hand on his, anxious to hear his response. He looked from one of us to the other, paused, then relaxed. All right, I am tired. Letting go of him, the captain turned to me. See that he gets to his quarters all right, Andi. Yes, sir. I don't see what the fuss is about, the doctor grumbled. Please, Dad. I looked up into his eyes for a moment. He sighed and let me lead him out of the mess hall. I'm hungry, he began when we were a few feet down the corridor. I'll get you something. He nodded and kept silent for the rest of the walk to his cabin. He lay down without complaint and nodded again when I said, I'll be right back with your breakfast. I hurried out of the room, heart pounding. My hands shook and I tried to take calm, slow breaths. Just tired wasn't good enough anymore. Something was the matter.